Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends wrestle with technology in a desperate attempt to get this episode recorded. My name is JG McCorney, and we are here to discuss the Beatles as ever we are. I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello. Oh, and just as you said that, video popped up on the screen. Technology
Oh,
is back, baby.
excellent. Well, that's incredibly great to hear. We've been suffering some technical difficulties here in Beatles Stuffology Mansions, which means unfortunately this is about our fifth attempt to record this episode, and rarely has there ever been so much effort expended for such a little amount of material when it comes to the music. But this week we are going to do our best to find something to say about "I Want to Be Your Man." So, Andrew, what do you think about "I Want to Be Your Man"?
It's short.
Yeah, well, excellent. And that's it. It's been lovely talking to you. No, I suppose we better find something to say. Yeah, you're right. It's really short, even by 1960s Beatles standards. This is well under 2 minutes.
And more effective for it, because it's worth noting that Ringo has kept this in his repertoire. There is with his all-star band, two R's in star, like the pun Ringo, nice one. And there's various versions of this that you can see that people have recorded, and it's about 7 or 8 minutes. And when you get into that and you're onto about the third guitar solo and you're onto the verse and the chorus for about the ninth or tenth time, then it really starts to grate. However good the performance is, however enthusiastic the vocal is, it's just the same thing again. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about how ELO's version of Roll Over Beethoven just goes on and on and on, and it's all the worse for it. Well, all the versions that are under 2 minutes, fine. Appreciate those versions. Anything longer, you can keep it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not going to be the one to argue with that. I mean, the thing is I mean, as well as being, very short in terms of the actual running time. I mean, there's barely a dozen words in the thing. It's incredibly sort of perfunctory. There's not even a middle eight. There's not even anything other than verse, chorus, instrumental break, verse, chorus, done. And that's fine. I mean, it's punchy enough. It's got a little bit of drive to it, I suppose. But I mean, yeah. I mean, trying to string this out any longer than a couple of minutes is absolutely going to be an exercise in futility.
Yep, there's 19 separate individual words, by the way. 19.
19. I apologize.
19.
I was out by seven.
That's okay. Well, no, you said barely a dozen. Okay, is that actually 12, or should we not get into that
Let's
at
not
this
get
point?
into that.
Let's not get into that. It kind of reminds me of, in that respect, of P.S. I Love You, which is the same verse and the same chorus over and over again. There's a little bit of lyrical variation in the second verse here, but not a huge amount. But it draws on quite a narrow group of words, but doesn't necessarily mean it's ineffective for it. As you know, our listener will remember, I'm not always. I mean, sometimes I'm quite fussed about the words if they're really banal, but I'm much more interested in the general kind of feel of something. So the fact that the language isn't necessarily sophisticated and varied doesn't really bother me that much because it kind of works. It's sort of an effective guttural kind of howl of "ooh, let me really be close to you" kind of thing. I'm slightly more interested in the variation from "I want to hold your hand" to "I want to be your man."
Yeah. Do you think that that is something which is explicitly sexual? Or do you think it's something which is sort of a progression just into maturity from a sort of adolescent hand holding into, yeah, I'm yours now. It's more kind of a relationshipy thing.
I don't know, because if you look at the lyrics as copyrighted, the word "wanna" doesn't appear in the song; it just appears in the title. So I reckon it's just the Beatles, or perhaps McCartney, even just being uber savvy when it comes to something that's commercial, and that "I wanna be your man" sounds a lot more effective and a lot more 1963 than "I want to be your man," because "I want to be your man" actually is quite difficult to say because of the T in "want" and the T in "to" following each other. "Wanna" just sort of works really quite nicely. So I think there's something in that. I think there's a link going forward in terms of a song like let's spend the night together. I want to be your man has lots of emotions in that respect as well. It's every bit as kind of forward, if you like, as let's spend the night together, but of course it doesn't have the same reputation as that song is supposedly meant to have.
Well, indeed. And yeah, I mean, we've barely even mentioned the Rolling Stones so far in this podcast, and we've recorded plenty of episodes up to this point. But at this point, it now does become unavoidable. We're gonna have to tackle the Stones, and I'm sure everybody listening to this is familiar with the couple of versions of the story as to how this song got finished and how Jagger and Richards ended up with it. But I mean, comparing them side by side, I'm really genuinely curious to ask you what your opinion of this is. But which do you think is more effective?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm always going to have a subjective opinion on this because I'm relatively agnostic about the Rolling Stones. I mean, to be clear, I I do believe that they exist. I'm not denying their existence. It's more just a case of I've never really been that bothered. There've been some good songs that have appealed to me, but I've only ever owned a couple of Stones albums, and Exile on Main Street being one of them. And I got quite bored of that after a while. You can sort of feel how loose that is, and their version of this feels pretty loose as well. I think there was a quote from one of them that referred to the fact that there wasn't really any production, so it sounds a bit kind of wild and chaotic, and you can hear that. And I think how you feel about it then comes down to how you feel about Mick versus Ringo, or how you feel about that slide guitar for that descending line between, after I Want to Be Your Man. You've got Brian Jones doing that descending slide, and that's either like totally rock and roll man, or it's oh god, that sounds a bit irritating. And I think I sort of veer on the side of sounds a little bit irritating.
Yeah, yeah, it's a curious one because I think when it comes to the Beatles version, there's an ever so slight air of, what's the word? I'm trying not to say desperation about it, but that's kind of also what I think I want to say as well. It sounds like it's trying really hard to be upbeat and energetic, and occasionally it manages it, but there's a slight sense of desperation about it that I think it gives it a slightly keening edge that doesn't quite work, and I would struggle to nail down exactly what that is because I don't think Ringo's vocal was bad. I think it's as good as he's likely to get at this point in his career. And like you mentioned, he's clearly fond of the song, still performs it. So that's great. I don't know. There's just something about it where for once the energy seems a little bit kind of manufactured in the studio. There's the like just before the guitar break. There's kind of like there's a bit of a yelping and yelling in the background to try and kind of get the energy level, and that actually works quite well. But for the rest of it, I don't know. It feels a bit kind of sort of flat, like they're just going through the motions. The Stones version is very much the other side of that coin. It's kind of all energy, but very little actual else going on. There's not really any great indication of sort of musicianship. I don't think anybody would argue that it's not Mick Jagger's best vocal ever. And yeah, that slide is just annoying. It's like, I really get what they were going for. I'm really not convinced they managed to land it. So I'm not really convinced that either version of this song is particularly brilliant. I just think they're not particularly brilliant in slightly different ways.
I think there's a few things related to that. I mean, I think if Ringo had sung this the way he'd sung Boys, then perhaps it might live a little longer in the memory. In that sense, it doesn't quite have that same commitment, and then that may be back to our old conversation about the fact that Boys was something that they'd played a lot, and he clearly had a relationship. Whereas this is written as a song to give to Ringo, play it a few times, rehearse it a few times, record it a few times, job done. There's also then the fact that the Stones were, even though the Beatles are hardly veterans, they are a lot further into their recording career. and therefore a lot more confident at being able to get what they want from a recording. There's maybe even a conversation to be had about, the guiding hand of Decca and Few. Isn't it absolutely fantastic that the Beatles never got signed by Decca? Because, look what a shamble some of their early recordings could have been in comparison to the guiding hand of George Martin. So you could chuck all of that into the mix and come up with a weight of theories. But I think when it comes down to it, it's just an okay song that is that has a very short kind of life before it's recorded. And it's another one of those quick turnaround numbers.
And yet it's one that lingers. It does kind of hang around for a long period of time. And, if Ringo's still performing it today, then that's half a century on. I mean, that's not bad for a kind of 1 minute 50 sort of blast of whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and suggest that the Stones are probably not missing it much from their live performances these days.
Well, can I give you some?
Just a feeling?
I'll give you some set list research from that.
Wow,
Okay,
lovely.
so I know
Love a bit of set
like,
list
we like
research.
our set list research. Obviously, this is clouded with the usual caveats of it's user generated content and therefore is liable to be wrong. But after 1964, the Stones played it once in 65, and then not again until 2012 when they played it 3 times. And then in 2022, they played it at the gig they did at Anfield in Liverpool. And you can see there's YouTube footage of that. You can see it. It's I mean, punchy would be a nice description. They rattle through it and they kind of look like they're having fun, but they look like they're having perfunctory fun. It's a let's do it, let's get it out of the way. It's a tribute to the fact that we're in Liverpool, and over. That's fine. However, Ringo Starr and his all-star band, Double R, like it, Ringo, very good, have apparently played it 657 times. And I think he only started gigging with
Wow.
them in 1989, maybe 1990. So pretty much you can imagine that's every single show. But the concept of the Ringo Starr All-Star Band, Double R, like it, Ringo, is quite an odd one, bearing in mind that they usually play, I don't know, about 16, 18 songs, most of which are sung by Ringo, despite the fact that in that band, much like another band he was involved with, there are really very, very competent musicians who are also considerably better singers. It's kind of like a rotating cast depending upon the tour. And those other people might get a song in each of the live shows. So there might be 4 songs that are sung by someone else and then the rest sung by Ringo. And, you can pretty much guarantee what most of those songs are going to be.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure I could work out the set list on my fingers. But I mean, it's also worth mentioning that about Ringo is that he's very diligent in the way that he gigs. He's a hard-working musician.
Yep.
He's still out there. He's still banging it away. He's over 80 now. And I mean, I know it's purely anecdotal, but almost everyone that seems to have seen the All Star Band just says it's really good fun. It's like it's a good night out, and that's not the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world. But he's not really aiming for that kind of McCartney-esque stadium, Glastonbury, whatever kind of thing. Like he's got his little band together. He gets to go out and do the thing that he loves doing, and this song is a part of that. And if he's played it 600 odd times, then it must be okay. You wouldn't play something that you hated 600 times, not for all the tea in China. And it seems to be his thing, and kind of good on him for that. I think it's a very underappreciated side of Ringo, but he's just like a genuine hard-working kind of musician who gets out there and gets on with it.
And I think even if you're to look at McCartney's set list, if he's playing 30 to 40 songs, as he seems to do this, say he plays 30 songs, per concert, you can probably work out what, say, maybe 20 of them are going to be, and perhaps of the remaining 10, there might be 1 or 2 that you might be a bit surprised by, but the rest you could draw from a list of, perhaps another 20 and say, well, it's going to be 8 of those in any one night. It's not like perhaps the early days of Wings where you probably not getting many Beatles songs because he was trying to establish Wings as a band in their own right. And John didn't play live very much at all after the Beatles split up, did he? But your chances are that again, not going to be playing any Beatles songs. And I don't know about George, but George was another one who, again, really didn't play live very much.
No, well, quite, but I mean, it seems to be something that Ringo genuinely enjoys doing. And to be fair, McCartney clearly gets a blast out of it as well. He clearly loves playing live, and I'm not going to drag over the whole 1969, 1970 kind of vintage, trying to get them back in the road again. But it's clearly something which is deep within him that he wants to do. Whereas, I can't find an elegant link to bring it back to the song, so this is just going to be a smash cut, I'm afraid. But
you can do it because what I think is quite interesting is that, of course, Lennon and McCartney were writing songs for Harrison that didn't have a huge amount of range. Well, what that means is that the 80-year-old version of Ringo can still sing them. The songs, of course, that McCartney wrote for himself at the time would have showed off his vocal flexibility and his vocal range. And now he struggles. He really struggles. There was I'm desperately trying to remember what it was. Oh, it was the was it the Taylor Hawkins memorial concert? The drummer from the Foo Fighters, where he came out with Chrissie Hynde, and they did. It's one of those that they never played live, but they also did that and Helter Skelter. And of course, Chrissie Hynde is doing the hard part of the vocals. I think it's Oh Darling was the other one that he did. And McCartney would do the Oh Darling, that bit. But when it then came to the screaming parts, Chrissie Hynde did that. So he just hasn't really got the vocals to do it anymore. But then that's because he kept all the good material for himself and gave Ringo the limited stuff that suited his voice. So come 80, it still suits his voice.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. And it's interesting, actually. Watching sort of McCartney at Glastonbury, it was Lady Madonna that stuck out for me that he really struggled with in terms of his vocals. And I think it's kind of a shame in the way I kind of love the way that his voice has developed. Like some of the stuff on McCartney 3, his voice sounds really good. But it's not the voice of somebody who's in their, late teens or early 20s, who's kind of knocking out rock and roll stuff. And it might be wiser at this stage for him to kind of focus on the material which is better suited to his voice. But at the same time, you got to see a Beatle, you got to have certain expectations. But I do really love the way that his voice sounds now. I think it's phenomenal. It's got that slightly kind of late period Johnny Cash kind of American albums kind of feel to it now. It's rougher and sort of dirtier and older, and it's just lovely. I really, really love the material that he writes towards how his voice is now. Ringo's voice has always been Ringo's voice, and yeah, it's not going to change now, that's for sure. And I think he does actually do a fair job on the recorded version of this song. It's like when I said it was desperate, it sounded slightly desperate before. I don't really think that comes down to the way that Ringo sings it. I think, funnily enough, actually, I think it's the percussion, that kind of constant, like, ching, 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 that's going on in the background. So, come on, this is exciting, this is energetic, isn't it? Oh, God, please just get to the end of the song. And I think that kind of undermines it. But, I mean, his vocal performance, if it's not as good as it is on Boys, it's still not bad. There's some decent harmonies going on, I suppose, as well. I think it's Lennon that's some backing vocals on this one. It's just maybe McCartney is as well, and it works well enough in terms of the vocals, I guess.
Do you think they knew that the Stones were gonna be big when they gave them the song?
My feeling is the answer to that question is probably yes. So we're going to have to address the story, aren't we? So, right, let's get that bit out of the way. So depending on who you believe, either Lennon and McCartney ended up finishing this song in the club. They went into a corner and just finished writing it whilst Jagger and Richards were sitting there, and just, that, oh, they were inspired to suddenly become songwriters and they became this big thing and blah blah blah. Or maybe they already had it finished and just gave it to them. We don't know. It seems like Lennon and McCartney both have slightly different variations in that tale, and I'm 100% sure that we're not going to be getting the truth from Mick Jagger or Keith Richards. Either way, I think the answer to your question is kind of yes. I'm not it's like full disclosure, I'm not a big Rolling Stones fan. In fact, I hadn't even really listened to a complete Rolling Stones album until about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And then I undertook a kind of project to review all of the 70s Stones album. Please don't ask why, I just did. And it was kind of interesting to dig into some of that stuff because I was aware that the Stones were kind of a big hole in my musical knowledge, and I kind of enjoyed working in the project. I'll actually throw it up in my blog at some point as I go through the album, but I do start with Let It Bleed, which is technically 1969 and great. But it was, I can't really say it made me a huge Stones fan, but it gave me an appreciation, if not an undying love. And kind of a lot of the earlier 60s stuff is kind of fine, but I don't completely click with it. But at this stage in their career, like, they were getting some momentum behind them. They may not have been at a point where they were writing their own songs, but then other than the Beatles, almost nobody was. And so the idea that Lennon and McCartney could knock out a quick number, give it to Keith, and just kind of move on with their lives is probably absolutely fine. It's this isn't the only artist that would end up recording Lennon and McCartney songs, of course. But I'm pretty sure they must have known that they were going to be something at this stage. They had momentum behind them now. They were garnering a name for themselves. And if they weren't at the top of the charts just yet, they were clearly going to be some kind of musical presence. Whether that presence was going to be another Jerry and the Pacemakers who hung on for a few years and then dropped out of sight without further comment, or whether they were going to go on to be the other big band of the 60s, probably wasn't clear. But yeah, I'm sure they must have known that they had something behind them.
So I wonder then if there's a sense of cheekiness in terms of, well, they're going to be the next big band off the block, so we'll give them a leg up, and then we can always say that we helped them to become what they were. They wouldn't have been what they were if it wasn't for us. I suppose the other thing to then have a think about is whether this song is associated more with the Beatles than with the Stones. And that's not really something, that's more of a question to kind of throw out there and to sort of get people to think about, as they listen to this, as they listen to the song, is it a Stone song? Is it a Beatles song? Who has the greater association with it? I think it sort of lives longer in the legacy of the Stones because of its significance as a charting single, but whether that counteracts against the overwhelming popularity of the Beatles, I don't know.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that this got to number 12 for the Stones, which was their first top 20 hit, and that's not nothing. I mean, that's an achievement. I know there's not really any way to answer this question either, but it would be interesting to know whether that success was purely down to the recorded version or whether it was because people bought the song because it had the name Lennon McCartney on it. If you went into NEMS or if you went into HMV or something and looked up this single, that's what you would see. So it may be that was enough. Just seeing the name was enough to garner curiosity from enough people to sort of push it up the charts. Again, my knowledge of Rolling Stones history isn't really good enough to know whether that's actually the case or whether it was purely on the quality of the recording. Although the recording itself is crude at best, let's be honest. So I don't know, but it's interesting to speculate.
So it's worth linking that to the point about the story behind it as well, because actually, I've heard people talk versions where Lennon McCartney or Lennon or McCartney, I don't know if it was both, one of them walking down the street bumped into Mick and said, "Oh, I've got a single for you," or someone leaning out of a cab and shouting at someone else, and all of that sort of thing. There's all sorts of variations, isn't there? But between October and November, both the Beatles and the Stones recorded it and released it. It was one of those quick turnarounds. The Beatles recorded it first as part of the sessions for the album. The Stones released it as a single before the Beatles album came out, which I think is quite interesting. Whether there was any desire to rush it out, whether they even knew that each other were putting out that particular version in that format, I don't know. But it's always interesting to think that the Beatles, having heard the Stones have a single with it, thought, well, we'll just carry on. We'll put it out there. It's not a problem, because that was the kind of thing that was happening, wasn't it? There were multiple versions of the same song by different artists.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's something that we mentioned in the podcast before, that there were plenty of artists who would release the same song, even a couple, so 3 or 4 different versions of the same song on the charts at the same time. And yeah, this is absolutely another example of that. Yeah, why wouldn't they have a problem banging out both versions pretty much at the same time? That was just what happened.
Yeah, I mean, sort of interesting to think that there's this sort of behind the scenes tussle. Even if there was no actual tussle, it kind of looks like it because of the recording dates and the release dates. So it's kind of linked with both of them. But interesting how quickly both move on and get other things done. And it's a staging post, isn't it? We've said that before about various Beatles songs. They're merely a means for getting them from one place to another. And the Rolling Stones made enough of an indent with this to then go on and write their own songs, develop their own way of working that made them go a lot bigger as well. So it's one of those that it's fine. It does its job. It helps us move from where we were to where we're going to go. And in terms of cultural significance, I think that's probably as good as it's going to get.
I'm very much inclined to agree with you. I can't think of a way of shoehorning this into the conversation. I just want to mention the fact that the Stones version of this song was the very first thing ever broadcast on Top of the Pops. I just think that's an interesting fact, so I've dropped it in there, but I also have nothing else to say about this song.
That's fair enough. Consider it dropped.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, we better give it a score then. So, what would you like to give this?
Oh, well, without seeing the other ones that I've already scored, I'm going to say it's a maximum of a 5.
Oh, that's exactly what I'm going to give it as well. I'm gonna plunk it right in the middle as well. I agree with what you said. It's functional. It takes its place in the album. It gives Ringo something to do. It's still giving Ringo something to do, and that's fair enough. I think then we can probably leave it there for this one. I think we've done really well to get half an hour out of this.
We've made it. It's done. It's over.
Thank God.
It is like in the can.
It is
5 or 6.
Yeah, God, I'm so relieved to have this one over. Right, quickly, before we lose all sense of dignity and decorum, you can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter @Beatles_ology, and you can find my blog at www.jgmacquarie.scot, which I will, as I said, at some point I'll put up that Rolling Stones thing I worked on, just because it's kind of interesting. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, Devil in Our Heart. But until then, keep listening.